Hey everyone, hope you're doing well today. I have a shorter video out for you guys, and today we're going to be talking about Dominique Venner and his essay or pamphlet called For a Positive Critique. So Dominique Venner was involved with the French New Right, and he was associated with people like Alain de Benoit and other people in the French dissident right. And in the 1960s, in the early 1960s, he was arrested as part of the Generals or the Algiers Putsch, which was a kind of like a coup attempt to try to force the French president at the time, Charles de Gaulle, to keep Algeria as part of France. So this guy has seen a lot. He's been in the, I guess what you would call the dissident right movement for a long time. He died back in 2013, but he's been, in these movements. He's seen a lot of stuff. He's like an old head, if you will. He's been around for a while, so he has quite a bit of knowledge to draw upon. But after his release from prison, he wrote this pamphlet or this essay for positive critique. And the purpose of his work here was to serve as a kind of manual of praxis for a nationalist revolution, while also outlining a positive view of the future. So in a way, he tries to be kind of the Lenin of the right. He tries to be the one who takes all the various ideologies, all the various theories, and kind of condense them into a manual of action, how to get those results. We can talk all day about what we want or our criticisms of the system, but Venner puts out an actual positive view of how we can achieve a revolution. So he lists several don'ts, if you will, several things that aren't going to help with the revolution, things we need to avoid pretty much at all cost. So one example he has is terrorism. The way he views terrorism is that all it does is it just creates more animosity between you and the general populace, as well as it gets the authorities cracking down on you as well, but you don't accomplish anything. So it's just pure negative. You just do something because you want to do something because you're frustrated or whatever. However, it gets you nowhere, and it's only as a setback. There's literally no reason for you to do terrorism whatsoever. Another thing he has is archaism. An archaism, he means that people who are trying to just return or maybe replicate the past verbatim, one for one. And with this, he says you just repel more people than you attack when you're just trying to talk about some mythical past or some romantic version of the past. In modern times, for our movement, this might be seen as something like people fantasizing the 1950s when really, they've never experienced the 1950s. They were, probably born in the 90s or sometime, and all their only vision of the 1950s is, advertisements that they saw when they were playing Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas. The next thing that he has of not to do is conformism. So he defines conformism as a sort of reactionaryism that trusts politicians whenever they wave around the flag and give lip service to patriotism. And he calls it yielding to old bourgeois reflexes. Essentially, it's when politicians, mainstream politicians, people who are part of the system we're trying to overthrow, it's when they go around in the American context, they maybe, wave around an American flag, say, I love America, we love the troops, support the troops, just things like this in general, where they try to basically co-opt a nationalism to serve their interest. And then he has opportunism. So this, in our terms, would essentially be grifting. People who are only trying to either, get money, or they want to use this as a way to launch a future career in mainstream electoral politics. And then he has something he calls mythomania. And one quote he gives under this subsection is, he says, if they recruit as few as 10 high school students, they think themselves Mussolini. If they boast that they command a group of 5,000 organized men, it means they merely have a ragtag mob of several hundred. And he basically, it's like kind of like a romanticist mindset, where you just like romanticize like kind of revolution. And he says it's part of a problem of reading too many spy novels. And the next point he has is no alliances with men of the regime. And this kind of goes back to conformism. You don't want to ally yourself with the system. And then he states the obvious mathematical fact that 0 plus 0 equals 0. What this means is that a large coalition of all these problematic groups that we said, even if you got, thousands of these people, but they all have the problems, listed above, you're still going to have 0, because 0 plus 0 equals 0. You need, and he's going to talk about this here in a little bit, because you can't just have a bunch of problematic people all of a sudden when they join a group to become non-problematic. It's just going to be more problematic. And then lastly on the don'ts is you can't conduct warfare in the age of tanks. So what he's getting at is that you can't just duplicate the revolutionary strategies of, say, Vladimir Lenin, Mao Zedong, the National Socialists in Germany, what happened in Italy and other places as well, because those are much different times, and you have to be able to adapt to your times. You can learn from those people. However, the situation is probably very much different from what it was in the 1920s or the 1930s, and therefore we have to adapt to the new way of life, the new way the system operates. So Venner defines revolution as not the seizure of power, but the use of power to construct a new society. So revolution is about taking power and wielding power to create a future, to create a new society, right? And if there's no revolutionary theory, he says, if there's no revolutionary theory developed, there isn't going to be any successful nationalist movement. Revolutionary theory is what acts as the unifying principle between various factions, various nationalist factions that might have some ideological differences or personality differences, but having a cohesive revolutionary theory unites these groups to create an actual praxis. And one of the things he talks about in developing a revolutionary theory is kind of what I talked about a few minutes ago, in that we can't just go back to the 1920s and 30s, because a lot has changed since then. We can't just copy what the Italians did, for instance, because governments now, the system now, various states now, they're much more stronger than they were then. This is largely because capitalism has created these kind of super states, these more complex states. But also another big thing that's changed due to capitalism is that capitalism has alleviated many of the basic needs of people and has given them a high standard of living, a high level of comfort. And because of this, people have something to lose. So people are no longer really starving peasants who have nothing to lose, and they might throw their weight or their support behind a revolutionary movement. But that's because their options are either to starve, or maybe they can go with someone and maybe they can get food, right? But we have to truly understand what we're up against. These regimes have changed since then, and the main thing Venner stresses is that we need to develop a revolutionary consciousness to overthrow the regime and to implement our own system. And this revolutionary consciousness, he says, arises through both personal experience and study and education. For this allows people to be above propaganda. For instance, when politicians wave around a flag or give lip service to certain ideas that might resonate with us. And also another thing he points out, because he's writing this during the height of the Cold War, is that we can't be tricked by blind anti-communism. He's anti-communist, but he doesn't want our anti-communism to be directed to something like a pro-capitalist or some other type of pro-system thing. So he says be careful of that. And that's why we need a revolutionary consciousness, so our people aren't tricked by this. So the revolutionary consciousness also allows one to fight the system when the odds are high, and even when it seems that all hope is lost. For if you have a revolutionary consciousness, you're able to keep your morale even in the face of setbacks. And these revolutionaries, these people who have developed over a time this hardcore revolutionary consciousness, are going to be the people who construct the new regime once the old regime has fallen. Another thing I like what Venner points out is that revolution isn't going to happen overnight. Both communists and fascists struggled for decades to achieve their revolutions, and the revolutionary progress was never straightforward. They had setbacks, they had recoveries, but they always learned to adapt to their struggles, to their setbacks. They always learned to adapt and overcome those obstacles. And the type of people that we need in the ranks, these people with the revolutionary consciousness, is what he defines as militants, people who are defined by doctrine, not people just following a personality. Because you want these people, you want these militants, because that makes an organization more resilient. Because if you just have these various cults of personality, then if something happens to that leader, say a scandal, say their death or their disappearance of somehow, or get arrested or something, then that organization can fall. But if you have people who are defined by their doctrine, their education, their yearn for revolution, and not just personalities, then you create much more resilient organizations that can handle setbacks, that can handle problems more easy and more effective. And leaders, likewise, he stresses, also have to be militants. This is a must, and they can't be these political career-seeking, or grifters. And when it comes to actually establishing a nationalist organization, Venner proposes that you need one powerful, hierarchical nationalist organization that's able to unite through a revolutionary theory, through a positive critique, through all these things, that's able to unite all these various smaller nationalist groups and direct them to a common goal. And it doesn't really matter who these people are, what background they come from, as long as they're quality men. You want quality over quantity. He says 5 militants is greater than 50 weirdos. So with this organization, with this sort of umbrella nationalist organization, you're going to want to have various bases, various subgroups, various cadres all around that are entrusted to qualified people to carry out specific functions. And in each of these groups, you want to make sure that each member is utilized. You want to make sure that people are not overworked, nor are they underworked, because you don't want to have, people who feel like they're doing nothing and, they kind of, lose steam and they kind of drop out, but you don't want to overwork your good people either. So some of the goals of these various bases is to establish bases amongst the people, such as among students, farmers or peasants, urban workers, various guilds and whatnot. There's a lot of different things that need to be done. And he says a centralized system with decentralized cells is the best way to achieve this revolution. And the primary goal of the greater umbrella organization is to gain institutional and political power. This doesn't mean to neglect, winning the support of the people. However, the main goal should be about using and wielding power to create a new society. But in order to do that, you have to gain political power. And another thing that he stresses is the need for solidarity. You need to support people, your fellow nationalists, your fellow dissidents who have been hurt by the system, who have been imprisoned, who have suffered economically or physically even. You need to have solidarity with those people. However, you also need to have solidarity with other foreign nationalist organizations as well. And now, lastly, here is Venner's positive critique. So this is his future vision for once a nationalist organization is able to wield that power to create a new society. This is him trying to lay the groundwork. And again, this is just a pamphlet, a short or kind of a long, medium essay. So he's not going into like the nitty-gritty details everywhere. But he is laying what might be the groundwork for a more in-depth positive critique and a more a detailed vision of the future. So he says that both capitalism and Marxism need to be rejected because they're the same side of the same coin, or different sides of the same coin, rather. And he says that the European ethos of honor needs to be embodied, something that rejects the slave morality of liberalism and Marxism. And we need to realize that life is a battle. Life is a sacrifice, and that's part of life, and that's how our future vision needs to be. And he says that European society is unique because it mixes metaphysics and material necessities, a synthesis of the individual and the community. And ultimately, the world, we have to realize, doesn't yield to systems but to will. And legitimacy belongs to those who can will it, who can wield power and cultivate an elite. So this elite, he says, this elite that needs to be cultivated is the top 5% of people in a society. These are the people that need to be running society. These are the people that need to be sought out to be running society. And we need to be creating, once in power, an organic economy against capitalism and communism, where capital and labor work side by side. And lastly, which is one of his main points, but it doesn't get talked about too much in this pamphlet, is sort of a pan-Europeanism that respects the various nationalities while also creating a European civilization and founding a young Europe, basically a new Europe founded on the old, which doesn't just replicate the past, but creates its own positive vision for the future.